Hello and welcome back. This particular segment is going to be on, it's going to cover both plants and medicine, or plants and pharmaceuticals. As you see here, we're beginning with plants as medicine, but this is going to take us back to the way it was. My intention here, one of the things I didn't mention at the beginning of the program, is part of my intention is actually to bridge old world practices with modern day technology, and or just today's world. We have ongoing problems with degenerative disease, and of course with the continual introduction of pharmaceuticals and other toxins in the environment. I mean, just our technology is just advancing faster than our bodies can keep up with. And so the idea here is to actually bridge the gap between the way it used to be and be able to integrate it with what we currently have. The way we used to practice medicine does not even come close to what the body can do. It's not the same. It's just not the same. And we will get into a little bit as to why that is here. You might say that we still have, we have the plants, we still have the human body, but there have been changes that have occurred, and I will address that as we go on. So here we are. This particular, as you can see, this is through an old manuscript, an Arabic manuscript of the mandrake plant with descriptions as to what it was used for. This is one of our well-known psychoactive plants, as is henbane and others, but this is the one that they used. Their medicine people were considered shamans. Medicine was a spiritual practice, if you will, where they relied on their gods to help them heal. And as strange as that may be, I'm not suggesting you worship plants, but I am encouraging us to actually realize that through the use of plants, you're actually connecting with something much bigger than yourself, and you're giving your body the chance to do what it's designed to do, which is heal, because nothing heals the body but the body itself. Plants are just access to something more, to a life force that cannot be replicated. Here you have additional clay tablets. As you can see, the Ebers papyrus and the Kahun medical papyrus are both Egyptian. I forget how many papyruses there were, but these two particular ones actually do speak volumes on the use of plants and their medical practices, as do the Sumerian clay tablets. These clay tablets are roughly 5,000 years old. In the case of the Sumerians, there's 12 recipes that refer to over 250 various plants. Again, the henbane, the mandrake, and the poppy. Poppy, as you know, is where opium comes from, the opium poppy, and this is where we get morphine, this is where we get heroin and codeine. So these plants have been around and being used for approximately 5,000 years, and they provide. They've been taking care of us. When I start talking about plants, I'm just astounded by what we have been able to do with them and how easily it was for us to recognize their value. The Sumerian was apparently unintentionally buried and only recovered in the 19th century. The reason I include this one is because it was buried for so long, and it just is a perfect example as to the role plants actually played If you can hear that noise, I do apologize. All of a sudden it got loud here. So I want to say a little bit more while we're on this particular slide. It's not just the Egyptians or the Sumerians. It's not just in the Middle East, if you will, where plants were being used. We have the Chinese text that includes 365 drugs, dried plant matter that was being used, and what they were doing was they were creating, they were concocting and compounding. The ancient Vedas mention treating with plants. Again, these are things that continue in these cultures that are continuing on. I do want to say that in addition to the plants, animals play a huge role in this. I mean, animals play a huge role, period. From the way we are studying genetics, the genes, to behaviors. Believe it or not, I don't know how familiar you are or not with attachment disorders and the attachment model in psychology, but that actually came to light through the observation of animals. So observing animals and the way they actually used and consumed plants was intriguing to us, and therefore part of what inspired us to actually begin working with the world around us. They didn't have an ability thousands of years ago to actually test these plants. They just observed and they applied. And it was about 3000 BC when they began to distill plants. Again, you have to wonder what inspired them, really what was going through their minds to think about these things, but to even try. But they did recognize that these plants had aromas, and maybe it made sense to them to try and boil them and see if they couldn't capture the nectar. And so that's what began around 3000 BCE with apparatus that looks a lot like this. Now, this is something that's still used in India today. This is called Mohenjo-daro. These are known for catching the floral water. Like I said, you can get your fragrances this way, and that's one of the things that was important to them. They wanted to, they could adorn themselves. The higher ups, in the wealthy, I don't know if there was a lot of wealth, but the leaders wanted to anoint themselves, and they would do so with the floral waters. Now, to my dismay, they were discarding the essential oils and just using the floral waters. But the interesting thing is this when you actually, if you look online or you look in different places, and you can get hydrosols, and you probably maybe have even heard of rose water. If it's real rose water, it's not being sold. I will say that much. I have been around when they steam distill rose petals, and what they capture with the rose water is actually smells a lot like cat urine. So real rose water is not something that you may appreciate. But hydrosols in general are just that. They are the waters that are collected after through the process of distilling your plant matter and capturing the essential oils. You also get your floral waters, and they are done in a manner such as you see in front of you here. That didn't come about, the actual saving of essential oils didn't occur until about in the 1200s, the mid-13th century. So here you have plants that were being ingested for food. You have plants that were being dried, as we saw, and being used in the form of herbal medicines. There was, I wish I had kept the image. There was one image I was trying to find where they actually found in a ship that sunk pills it was probably from about the turn of, the early AD, like the first 100 years AD, a ship that had sunk, and in it, when they had found tin canisters, wood-lined tin canisters that apparently were very well sealed, but inside of that were pills that were dried matter, plant matter, primarily carrots, and but they had compacted them and turned them into pill form so that people could just swallow and get the benefit of the pills. Now, the funny thing about it is today, you can actually still get food-based vitamins that look like that. Garden of Life actually has, they look like compounded, just compact food matter. And I appreciate those far more, but it's such a hard sell to get people to understand that that's actually a better one. They want to go with all the labels that look fancy and pharmaceutical-like, when really what you do honestly benefit more from are the food-based supplements. But that is the next section on nutrition. I just wanted to say that there's some similarity there when you look at these capsules that were being, these pills that were being made thousands of years ago, and we were able to find them. I may have actually, if I can find that image, I may actually post it here in our classroom, and so that you can actually take a look at those. So, what are essential oils? I've heard this question more times than I can imagine. I've worked in naturopathic offices where, the naturopath was not real familiar with essential oils. I've had some naturopaths not want me in their office because they would say the oils would destroy their herbs. I didn't understand that. I mean, that would be pretty powerful, and they are that powerful, but I don't know that they would actually, I have herbs and oils in my workspace, and I don't see any complications there. However, what are they? Well, I have here on the bottom of the slide a quote by the Royal Society of Chemistry, and that explains very well. Just the first word here, they're just secondary metabolites there. You can see it's secondary metabolites there. These are secondary metabolite. The best way I know how to explain that is when you, it's just the way that the plant is breaking it down. So through its own metabolism, it takes in the chemistry, through respiration, through nutrition, and so through its own chemistry, it has to break these chemicals down, and in order to be used, it needs it for other purposes, for growth and whatnot. So essential oils are basically secondary metabolites. It's not the blood of the plant. That's one of the things I've heard described countless times. Essential oils do not circulate through the plant. They are stored in various cells, such as that are found in the bark, the wood, your leaves, obviously your flowers, and so it is what creates. It is in part what creates what you can smell. That's the reason. If you actually, I don't know if you've ever rubbed, I'm sure you probably have rubbed a leaf like rosemary or mint and then smell your fingers, or even lavender. I know it will do that. You can get the smell on your finger because you've actually picked up a little bit of the essential oil. It's an extracellular fluid that is, it's kind of like with us, we have intracellular and extracellular, and essential oils are just that. They're just stored in cells, the extracellular fluid that are stored throughout their structure. Most plants, when you get the essential oil, consist of at least 100 constituents, chemical messengers. signaling molecules. That was the word I was trying to come up with. Essential oils are basically signaling molecules. They were also active. They were 100% active ingredients, where if you notice when you look at any nutraceutical, pharmaceutical, anything that is manufactured will have active ingredients and inactive ingredients. Your essential oils are 100% active ingredients. And they do elicit both pharmacological and toxicological effects in man and animals. And but it's very important for me to add here that there are no nutrients. This is something I really want to emphasize, that there's just there are no nutrients in essential oils, and this is part of the reason. Actually, this is the reason, not part of. This is the reason why nutrition is included in this program, because they work together. And they work together, and we'll find out more about that when we get into the nutritional piece. But the biological recognition that takes place in our cells, like we talked about in a previous segment, is the biological recognition picks up. How do I want to say this? The body actually recognizes the signaling molecule. Okay, in this case, we're using essential oils, and it's recognizing all of these little chemicals. I'm going to use my laser pointer, my laser. So I don't like that one. So I'm just messing with my thing here. I'm just going to go back to the laser. Okay, so all of these right here, these would be considered signaling molecules. These are all, this is different chemical structures of secondary metabolites that would be, of essential oils. So the cells in the body recognize these, and therefore will pick it up. Now, what does it do? I mean, these are signaling molecules, but the cells need more, and that would be your nutrients, your cofactors, your minerals, your vitamins. Those are what's necessary to for the signaling molecules to actually carry out the full role and actually assist these cells with doing what they're there to do. So I really highlight the fact that essential oils do not contain your nutrients, although as you can see here, they're a valuable source of pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, and cosmetics. To harness the potential of these natural products, reliable methods must be developed for the rapid and sustainable resupply, microbial production of plant secondary metabolites through the heterologous expression of plant biosynthetic genes represents one such solution. This highlight focuses on recent advances in the microbial biosynthesis of plant secondary metabolites, including terpenoids, flavonoids, and alkaloids, as well as providing a brief insight into the current limitations and future prospects. So, again, these are being used for pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, and cosmetics. Now, I want to emphasize here being used for nutraceuticals because not for their nutritional component. And if anybody wants to tell you that they have, that's what they're being used for, they're mistaken. They do not contain nutrients. They work alongside nutrients. However, I do not agree with the ingestion of essential oils because they already are secondary metabolites. All right, they're already secondary metabolites. To ingest an essential oil means the body is going to break it down even further, and it's going to metabolize it even further. I'm going to say a little bit more about that here shortly when we get into some chemical structures of things. But I just want to highlight at this moment that to digest and metabolize secondary metabolites through our own liver is going to alter their chemical structure even further. As far as their benefit to the plant, they aid in protection as well as attraction. What we do know is that I want to go back to, again, what we talked about in our last segment on health, which is, these fat lipid, these lipid soluble chemicals that are being picked up by the cells and they're in the environment. Plants will actually, and as you know, their aromas, okay, we've already talked about the aromas being part of the essential oil. And so as their aroma is being released, whether you like the smell or not, doesn't make any difference. There's chemicals being released, and these are signaling molecules as well. So secondary metabolites, signaling molecules can be released to signal other plants. And so they're finding that plants are actually communicating with one another. Plants that contain salicylic acid will send out, this is like if there's a predator or there's a threat, more importantly, in the area, they'll send off their secondary metabolites, signaling molecules to other plants will pick them up and can make adjustments within their own DNA structure, which we will see here shortly. We'll talk about a little bit further, but there is an aspect that actually helps other plants, as we've seen with signaling molecules, to modify the DNA in order to make certain adaptations for the protection and sustainability, to sustain life. I'm tripping over my own tongue here. So that's what these do, and so they do this between themselves. It's not just something that they're doing for us. They're doing this for within their own kingdom. The next section in the paperwork, the second handout that you have, is modification of genetic expression. And I've got this listed under that. This is, on the left here is a molecule that's found in myrrh. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that word. I give up on the Latin words or the botanical word names. But it's just, this molecule here is a constituent in myrrh. This is what the molecule of morphine looks like. The only difference between really the two, there is a couple extra, there's a little bit more of a difference, but the biggest difference besides they both contain hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. The only difference is your nitrogen. And this is what influences, this is the influence that differs from morphine. Although they both of these chemical structures provide analgesic relief. So it's this is what makes this a peptide. This makes this more of a protein, where this is not. I want to say here as well, this would be a reason why we don't develop allergic reactions to essential oils, because essential oils don't contain nitrogen, where man-made does. And it's the nitrogen that ends up triggering a potential allergic reaction because it's a type of protein. And depending on the system, I don't necessarily agree with the word, the way, allergy makes sense. I want to say this here, except that allergic, when we hear allergy, we think problem. So I prefer to substitute the word hypersensitivity to instead of allergy, just in the context of shifting from bad to good. Yes, there's a hypersensitivity. Yes, it can be dangerous. I recently had one with a B vitamin complex that scared the living daylights out of me, broke out in full body hives, and ended up calling the company, but that's another conversation. So, but hypersensitivity is a sign that the immune system is working. Sometimes it means it's overworking, but it also means that you probably don't need it. There's a whole number of things that could mean. And so these nitrogens are what actually man inserts to make them proteins so that they're biologically recognized. And but again, both of these molecules have an analgesic effect. They've studied this one. They recognize that this one does. There's another one, the curzarine. It's listed on your paper here, and I've listed the chemical structure. That's also another constituent in myrrh that has analgesic effects as well. Alkaloids that were mentioned in the prior slide, these are, and that's what this is, that's what morphine is. They vary. That's the reason why I don't have them all listed here. There's over 3,000. They change from over 4,000 plants. So alkaloids are quite popular. I mean, they're in plants. This is one of the first constituent, molecules that we identified and began producing, or separating. I want to say extracting and separating from the plant in order to have a more of a medicinal effect without having to administer the entire plant. So under alkaloids, I've got listed morphine. Alkaloids, again, like I said, have a nitrogen atom, and alkaloids are in your plant structure, so that is part of your plant constituent. It is not necessarily something that is you get from an essential oil. It's it's when you get an essential oil, it's more broken. It's further broken down. So the alkaloids are distinguished by their nitrogen atom. Caffeine is actually an alkaloid that antagonizes the adenosine receptor, and adenosine is very influential in the brain, and it's used to make ATP. So that's just another example there of your alkaloids. So alkaloids aren't all bad. I mean, I guess some people could say in the sense of caffeine it's bad, but I do know that in some people, caffeine actually has a medicinal effect on them. I myself don't necessarily, I want to say this about caffeine. Caffeine, I don't like to have more than 1 cup of coffee a day, but I guess I do have caffeine throughout the day when I drink other things. Caffeine has been known to, it has been found, I should say, to alter the structure of it's called the dopaminergic pathway. And the dopaminergic pathway is your dopamine receptors, and so it's the alteration of that structure within the brain that signals us, or is the identifying marker, if you will, of addiction. And so I have a whole host of questions, and I may do an additional program on just addiction alone, because I think it's really important for us to begin to understand what addiction is and what potentially is at the root of it. I don't believe that it's a weakness. I have my theories on that, and I won't go into that at this point. But I just want to say that just put it in the back of your mind at this point that caffeine does alter that structure. It does alter the brain that is known to indicate addiction. And that is, like I said, that is the physiological marker that identifies addiction, and it's through that change in that structure. So, and yes, there are illicit drugs that do alter that structure as well. There's very few that do not, but refined sugar does as well. So smoking, drinking alcohol, consuming caffeine, consuming refined sugar, those 4 alone will alter the dopaminergic structure. And so which came first? That's my question. And like I said, I will probably do, now that I've been inspired to do yet another program, because I think that's a very important one. Moving on, endorphins also are neuropeptides. They are actually produced in the immune cells. This is the reason why morphine is considered something that's very beneficial, because it gets into the opiate receptors. Those require neuropeptides in order to elicit anti-inflammatory analgesic effects. And so here you have the chemical that was obtained via opium poppy for the benefit of analgesic effects. Now, and as we say here, endorphins are actually produced in our immune cells and also act on the opiate receptors to ease pain. So we have our own, here we have an example of our built-in ability to produce our own analgesia. And so therefore, what you have is, again, you have the ability. So is it beneficial to support the body? Of course, if the body's overstressed, and we'll see here shortly why that would be the case, when the body's stressed, additional assistance is beneficial. When you consume plant matter, instead of being synthesized, they have a variety of actions in the body that include, as you can see here, anti-malarial, anti-asthma, anti-cancer, and more. All of which, they all give you an immediate effect on the immune system. They're all supporting the immune system. And what it does is, if I've never said anything to anybody about essential oils, the one thing that I tell them is that it relieves stress. And of course, the very first thing out of, that occurs in their mind is, oh, it's calming and soothing. Well, there is that, but it actually relieves the effects of stress. And in this case, as you can see, when you consume these, and when I use the term consume lightly, because it could be through ingestion, it could be through inhalation, it could be through topical application. But when you use plant matter, instead of it being synthesized, you get a full host of benefit that supports the immune system and actually takes the pressure off the immune system, so that it can remain as consistent as possible. As like I said, we'll come to find out that things begin to change under pressure. So on that note, I'm going to not turn the page just yet. In my case, I am over here. Back to myrrh. After my own personal use of myrrh has been astounding. Again, I actually like I said, it works on the opiate receptors. It does not necessarily, it influences the body. It does not replace endorphins. It does not do what morphine does. It asserts its effects in a different way that actually stimulate the body to produce the endorphins. And so that's the emphasis that I want to place here, is there are some oils that have mimic, but not so much. It's more an important component to say here is that they actually stimulate the body to produce what they're supposed to produce. So yeah, people can say that this actually has an analgesic effect, and maybe they're watching the biosynthesis of this particular chemical in the body. But to watch this biosynthesis, the interesting thing is what they're not pointing out is what they don't point out the full scope of the effects of this chemical. They do know this one. They do know that this one is picked up by the opiate receptors, and that's the reason why they're named opiate receptors, because of the origin of this chemical. So I am going to come over here and segue into get into what I was talking about with regards to stress, and myrrh in particular, or any of the alkaloids. If you consume a plant that contains alkaloids, even if you can consume, I'm going to say raw cacao, you're getting the caffeine. Yes, there's caffeine in that, and I hear people go, well, I can't have caffeine. But the interesting thing is that the combined effect is very profound on the body, and so it's much different than when you consume something that's been man-made. But like I said, when you consume it from a plant form, it actually alleviates the pressure that occurs that's been occurring in the system. You know, maybe you've been exposed to environmental toxins. Okay, that's stress. Maybe you've been exposed to emotional stress. You know, our range of stress far exceeds anything that a plant will undergo. But what we do know is that this particular woman here, Barbara McClintock, is known for her studies on maize. But the most important piece that I wanted to point out here is through her study of corn, she identified these jumping genes, okay? These are small pieces of the DNA that actually insert themselves into other places within the genome, and they are activated by stress, which occurs over a wide evolutionary range from bacteria to mammals. So this is saying that everything, basically, that has DNA in it has these jumping genes. And if you're exposed to a pathogen, it's that stress of being exposed that will cause an adaptation. Now, this brings me to what I want to say about the human species. Through the Human Genome Project, there have been 64 identified significant genetic adaptations that have occurred. Yeah, we do know that the shape and I mean, you can see that. I mean, you can definitely see that through the way man has evolved physically, just through the physical appearance alone. There is a dentist that, without even being involved with the Human Genome Project, because he was far before the time of the Human Genome Project. He was back in the 1930s. Price, he was a dentist. He's the man who's responsible for root canals, and then, but after a while, he took it upon himself. He and his wife traveled the world and visited indigenous cultures because he was beginning to notice a difference in people, and he was very curious to see what the differences, where they were coming from. So he visited indigenous cultures, and what he came to find was that those who lived off of the land and who remained off of the grid, if you will, and did not eat commercialized food, their physical structure was different. Women had wider hips, their jaws were wider, they just were built differently, stronger. And through the introduction of commercialized food and refined foods, we see narrower hips. We have more problems with births today, meaning we have more people who require C-sections, myself included. I've had 4. The need for orthodontics, where orthodontics wasn't even thought of hundreds of years ago. And like I said, he was doing this back in the 1930s when we still had a higher population of more indigenous people. It's just when they started crossing that bridge and beginning to eat domesticated food that we started to see a change in the human body. Oddly enough, when I learned of this study and I read up a lot on it, and I'll give you some information here as a handout. I went and looked at my own family, because my family is originally from Hungary, and just within 100 years, I mean, I come from, Hungarian is my great-grandmother and such. They were stocky women. Fast forward to today, and like I said, I had to have 4 C-sections. I've been in braces twice. I have a very narrow jaw. My jaw doesn't have enough room for teeth, and my son is the same way. So there's been a distinct change in my family line since the introduction of coming to the United States and eating commercial food, whereas we were a farming family. So living off of the meats and the milks and the grains that we grew. So there you have it. So the environmental changes are stressful, and so they cause they will prompt systemic effects. Now, like I said, there's been 64 major significant adaptations that have occurred, and we can see it visibly. One of the ones that we cannot necessarily see, although I say that very lightly, because we do have the advancement of pretty severe degenerative diseases going on, and new ailments or things coming into that are very rare, or not quite as common. But the most significant one as of late was that occurred back in the 1300s, right around 1340, during the time of the Black Plague, where the immune system, there's a significant imprint on the immune system that altered the immune system. The Black Plague, 70 million people died, and the biological recognition and the stress that was occurring began to alter the signaling molecules began to alter the immune system. These jumping genes, if you will, altered the immune system, and it never reverted back. It stayed, it remained the same way. Now, since 1340, or around that time, that era, the early 1300s, think of everything that has occurred since then. You've got the advancement of medication, you've got the advancement of chemicals. I mean, there's so much that has occurred in this last 800 years. It makes sense that you would see degenerative diseases on the rise. It just makes sense because the immune system cannot keep up. I know I said this a little while ago, and it's the truth. It cannot keep up. This is, again, another reason why I'm really strongly emphasizing the inclusion of plants, especially essential oils, when it comes to taking care of your health, or even preventing, the breakdown of health. Sometimes these changes revert. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, like I said here, it's unable to demonstrate the environmental stress permanently alters epigenome due to the centuries of, since we've domesticated, there's some notable changes, but it's very difficult to, it's not always permanent. I mean, and I guess what I'm saying there is, they've been able to demonstrate within plants that these changes do occur, but then they can change back. The human species is the only species that is not reverting back. So undergoing stress, these genes do what they do, and then you have, they just go, they stay the same way. Sometimes they will go back to the way they were, depending on the amount of relief or what the exposure was. I also want to highlight that DNA is DNA. I mean, it's just DNA. I mean, I think some people think that DNA differs. The DNA of plants is different from the DNA of people, and because I've been saying for so many years now that the DNA of the plant repairs itself. It works. It functions just like the human DNA, and so many people had such a hard time with that and really wasn't sure if they could believe that or not. And I did my due diligence because I needed to make sure that I could substantiate what I was saying, because the last thing I want to do is speak out of turn. And it is the case. The chemistry of DNA remains the same. It's just the placement of the nitrogen bases that makes it a plant versus being human. And as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of study going into the genetics of animals. They do a lot of work. This is how they're, I should say, doing a lot of not adapting, they're doing a lot of research in the way different genetics function, and they are trying to understand how this is working in the human being, but human subjects are not an option. Therefore, they go in and they'll do this with mice a lot of the times. There's just very, the differences in the mouse DNA versus the human DNA is very slight. So they can do this. One of the genes that comes to mind is the FOXP2 gene, which is known for its relationship to speech and language, but we've come to find out it is also a transcription factor, which means it is regulating the neurochemistry and is very, very important in the regulation of neurochemistry. And the FOXP2 gene, like I said, is speech and language. Any animal that has a vocalization that produces sound has a FOXP2 gene. And the human species is the only species right now that is being naturally selected to deactivate that gene. And think about the number of people that we have on this planet that are actually nonverbal. So they study this gene in mice. They do what's called knockout genes to actually understand. And when they made they did the testing on the FOXP2, they were actually able to get the mice to make more sound. So it's very interesting work. And the truth is that the chemistry is virtually the same. You got your A, T, S, and G. A, T, C, and G. I don't know why I said S. It sounded good. But those are your nitrogen bases, and those are what send, those are what actually make us who we are. So the same molecular bases produce similar chemical reactions when mixed appropriately. This is your epiallyles, and this is the premise of the GMO. Just different placement means different end results. So you have your different appearances, you got different abilities, forming words versus not forming words, songbirds versus a cricket, versus a roaring lion. This is your different abilities, your different appearances, and you can, like I said, through the evolution of understanding of this, they have been able to devise our GMOs. I wanted to go on and say here that I don't know. I just had a blonde moment there. Pardon me. I'm just sitting here looking at the slide thinking if I want to say anything else, and no, there's nothing else I want to say. So I'm going to go on to the next one and begin talking about just kind of referencing again plant constituents. These two particular slides here are, I don't know why that laser was in the middle there. That's very strange. Anyway, plant constituents, as I said, are considered secondary metabolites. I started to talk about this a little bit earlier, and I saved it for this slide. When you ingest essential oils, this is what it does. It's digested. The liver is part of the digestive system, and these CYP genes here, this is where the enzymes that are produced to actually break down our chemicals. So here you have codeine is broken down into these chemicals. Okay, codeine is actually turned into morphine in the system. Over here you have caffeine, and the way it's broken down into theophylline, theobromine, and then eventually a form of xanthine. This is what the liver does. Okay, the liver does this in order for further use. Okay, so I want to come over here to caffeine and say that theophylline is actually now used for in respiratory issues, as is xanthine, if you can find this in pharmaceuticals. So it's interesting that even though we talk about caffeine altering the brain structure, and we talk about it having addictive qualities as well as, interfering, and antagonizing, if you will, the adenosine receptor, at the same time, it actually breaks these down. So there's a reason for that happens, and we actually realize that when caffeine is metabolized, it actually produces very beneficial constituents that the body can now use. you think about it, codeine is broken down into morphine, and it's broken down in other chemicals. If these chemicals are necessary or not isn't of importance. If it is, the body will use it. If it's not, then it's eliminated. That's the whole thing, is that it breaks it down for elimination. So the point here is, when you ingest an essential oil, is it actually going to be broken down into something useful, or is it going to be broken down into something that needs to be eliminated? I have, so that's a guessing game. And then again, I want to also emphasize that some people have issues on these genes here. Okay, what I mean by an issue is an adaptation, a variation, defect. It's also known as a defect, polymorphism, something that is not functional. Now, if you have, so that could just be built into your genetics, which means you're not going to be metabolizing things the same way. This is where it gets really questionable. Essential oils have an inhibitory, antagonizing effect. They also have an agonistic effect. It just really depends. Our own hormones affect these enzymes, will stop the metabolism of something, slow it down, and we're going to get into this further with regards to synergy. But these genes right here are really very important, because they are being activated and deactivated all the time through our own chemistry, as well as the medications that we're taking, and stressors, like we talked about with this regards to those jumping genes. So that is the importance here, is to recognize that you have, we just don't consume something and it just go into the bloodstream. We consume something and then it's broken down for further use by the body or for elimination. It doesn't make any difference what you're consuming. And so this is the primary role of the liver, and this is the reason why I don't recommend the ingestion of essential oils. With regards to essential oils, you have your function groups. You have aldehydes, alcohols, as you can see here. You have the overall effects of your function groups. These are the ones that I think I would really like for you to emphasize. I'm going to highlight this a little bit differently and say, these are the ones I want you to pay attention to. And the reason why is, even though they're tonifying and energizing, your aldehydes can be irritating. Phenols are stimulating and known for their hepatotoxic properties. This is important, okay? The reason why these are important isn't to say that you're not supposed to use them, okay? This is to say that, this is to emphasize, I'm highlighting I'm highlighting the point that you need to, talking and drawing are not I can't do it at the same time. So anyway, they're important because it emphasizes the need to switch it out and to not stick with the same thing for very long. It's, some people think that all these, some essential oils are safe for use all the time. I disagree. They are, you have a handout here, and so noting that these important properties of the function groups, that is what helps you to understand. If you know what you have, and you can see that in the case of eucalyptus is great. People use it all the time. Consistent use of eucalyptus, not so great, because it's actually a neurotoxic, which means it can actually go the opposite direction. So this is another reason why less is more. There is a constituent in eucalyptus that actually helps with the, what do I want to say? It helps inhibit, or I should say scavenge, pardon me. It helps to scavenge a chemical called peroxynitrite. And peroxynitrite is a neurotoxin. Peroxynitrite is produced when the nitric oxide synthase gene is not functioning at its optimum. So it produces peroxynitrite. How that manifests in the body really depends on the rest of the genetics, but it does interfere with the neuroimmunity, which means it's now affected your immune system. It can lead to cardiovascular and respiratory problems, and it can also lead to scarring of the nerve tissue. as in the case of MS and other neurodegenerative diseases. So peroxynitrite is a chemical that is produced by the body, like I said, when there's a genetic adaptation that is not functioning properly. And eucalyptus actually contains a constituent that will help scavenge that toxin. And at the same time, overuse of eucalyptus, which has ketones in it, now becomes a neurotoxin itself. So balance is really important, and less is more important. So less is more. Anything else that I want to say here about your constituents? Just double checking here. On your second handout, I mean, I've got them all listed here with regards to the different constituents. I don't necessarily have all of their specific properties on here, although again, if you get, we're going to get into this further in other courses, but just wanted to let you kind of give you an idea all the different. And so what I do want to say about your oils is that they do, there's how do I want to say this? There's plants vary depending on their growing season, so their constituents change. An oil can contain a monoterpene, sesquiterpene, and a diterpene in it. It does contain, ketones. It can have any combination. If you look at a book on aromatherapy, on our website of aromatherapy, you will see crossover properties. You'll see that they all have there's a lot of similarities. It's understanding the primary constituents, and also recognizing like I said, the primary constituents and long-term effects, understanding that plants have varieties. So rosemary has a different, there's different rosemaries, there's different eucalyptus, there's different thyme, there's different lavender. And so each one of them has a different qualities. So really knowing, I mean, just to get a bottle that says lavender on it, or just to get a bottle that says eucalyptus on it, it doesn't help you. The different times, there's pretty significant differences within time. And so you need to understand which one you have so that you can actually identify the function groups and be able to choose wisely. Other important aspects here, let me take a look here. Yeah, so I just want to say, I already addressed, okay, so they contain everything. I'm sorry, guys, for getting lost here. I'm just I'm thinking out loud and double checking my notes to make sure that I get everything here for you. So, okay, I've said what I wanted to say along those lines. The next one, and, like I said, these all contain, they're, any oil contain any number one of these. And so that's the reason why you'll see a crossover of properties. And knowing what they're going to do. Estrogenic is another important one to pay attention to. Like I mentioned earlier, myrrh stimulates the immune system. Well, there's other ones that will actually stimulate the hormonal system, and that might be good, but if there's a particular influence of a specific hormone, you got to really use caution with that. So, and I go into that here a little bit further. I just wanted to highlight that one because for as much fun and as much as I appreciate, I mean, I actually have a great deal of respect for them. For as much as I love and appreciate them and enjoy using them, I've become concerned with the way we're not understanding I mean, this is where medicine comes from, guys. We're going to see this here. This is where medicine comes from, is through the study of these very constituents that are listed, that you have listed. They know what these do. I mean, these properties here on the lower right corner of your slide, they know this because they're studying it on a genetic level, and they're paying attention to the ultimate effects. So essential oils are great. You can go buy them and they're easily accessible, but you have to understand they have a physiological effect. There is a therapeutic effect of the essential oils that if we don't work with them with caution and use less of them, otherwise you're going to confuse the body and basically take in too much, and you are going to get no benefit whatsoever. And that's part of the reason why people don't understand why sometimes it's not helping any longer. When it comes to the synergy of constituents, the sum is greater than its parts. It does include offsetting the potential side effects. We are wired for balance, and that's an important piece that I want to say here. We talked about it earlier in the other session with regards to healing crisis. Healing crisis is just the body attempting to establish balance. That's the synergy. Even though it's not to our advantage, even though when we don't feel good, it's hard to believe that that's actually to our benefit, but it is to our benefit because it's indicating an attempt to recreate balance. And when you have your plant constituents, the important piece here is we have identified that certain plant constituents have certain properties, and they're being turned into medications, but without the synergy of the other active ingredients, like I mentioned earlier with regards to the alkaloids, the whole system is benefited. When you synthesize, you lose the synergy. And so this is the benefit to working together. Now, I say that, and I do know that there's a lot of blends in the market now that contain a ton. I mean, I say a ton. I mean, I think I've counted up to 10, maybe more of essential oils, but at least 8 to 10 different oils in one blend. That's too much. That's too many. I mean, you've got too many. Keep in mind, the oils have an overlap. There's an overlap of properties. Some of them contain the same constituents. Some, like a lot of them contain linalool. A lot of them contain geraniol. A lot of them contain myrcene. I mean, we have our constituents, and if we have limonene is another one. So you have a lot of similar. So if you all of a sudden you have 10 oils and they all contain you've got too many, there's just too much. And like I said, it begins to overload the system, and it sets you up for potential, you flood the receptors. And like I said earlier, you've got this ability to activate and deactivate your genes. And if you do too much, it'll throw the body into overload, and the body will have to attempt to create its own synergy because you've just thrown too much into the mix. And keep in mind, with every breath you take, every food you ingest, you're consuming. So the less we take in, especially in the way of essential oils, the better off we are. Now it's the combination that makes the most impact. And so again, I just really want to emphasize the importance of not overloading and just really working with this, minimally, 3 to 4 oils in a blend and no more, and using as few drops as possible. Scientists have identified the pharmacodynamics and the pharmacokinetics of plants. These are terms that are used in medicine. The pharmacodynamics is, it's a branch of pharmacology that's concerned with the effects of the drugs and the mechanism of action. So this is this example here demonstrates a mechanism of action when it comes to what happens in a cell. So this is not necessarily including any particular chemical. This is just our own chemistry at work here. This is the mechanism of action with a cell. So that's what this is. This is a demonstration of pharmacodynamics. The pharmacokinetics is the branch of pharmacology that's concerned with the movement of drugs within the body, which means the absorption, the distribution, and the elimination. So that would be the way it's the pharmacokinetics is what ends up happening once it hits the liver, and you have and how it goes from there. Now, like I mentioned a little while ago in this slide, with the liver metabolism, there is the ability to activate and deactivate various enzymatic genes, processes in the liver. And oils can do this, our own hormones do this, and our hormones do this a lot. They actually, hepcidin, the release of hepcidin keeps iron stored. When hepcidin is inhibited, when the flow of hepcidin is inhibited, hepcidin is a hormone, when that is inhibited, iron stores are released into the bloodstream. Angiotensin II receptor, when that is flowing, we don't break down gluten and casein. When that is flowing, that means that the autonomic nervous system is in need of alert. So angiotensin speeds up the heart rate, and it stimulates the stimulates the fight or flight response. So it activates other hormones to get us going. These are how our hormones work. They are paying attention to these pharmacokinetics of our own system and designing medications to have the same effect. So sometimes you'll have a drug that you take and it'll inhibit. The purpose of that is to maintain blood serum levels. This is the reason why you have contraindications. So this is, again, another example of synergy, because your essential oils will do the same thing. One of the ones that comes to mind is a constituent called camelazine. It's found in oils that actually have more of a blue look to them. So that would be primarily your blue, known as German chamomile. Yarrow white actually has a blue tint to it because it also has camelazine in it. And that particular constituent is known to inhibit one of the liver enzyme processes. And the interesting thing is when it inhibits it, it actually maintains the calming effect. Okay, so think about that built-in synergy. So you have however many active ingredients in one oil, and then you have, so it slows down the elimination of that particular constituent, slows down the elimination of the oil itself. Therefore, you have a synergistic effect that is actually helping to calm and soothe, and depending else on what else you're trying to apply. In yarrow white, it's very good for hormonal regulation, very, very good for analgesic, and as well as tissue repair. So think about how it just kind of calms you down and it helps to ease the pain, okay? In German chamomile, it actually is calming and actually has an antifungal effect as well. So it's very calming and soothing. So the synergistic effect is amazing. And that's part of it, also a demonstration of the pharmacokinetics, because it slows down the elimination of the oil itself so that it maintains the effects that it's attempting to provide. This is hugely important when it comes to our medications and when we can start to combine them. And another reason why I don't recommend consuming them, because otherwise you wouldn't get those kinds of effects. You actually lose the synergistic effects when you consume oils. That's what I've been wrestling with in my head. So I think that's really what I needed to say at this point, is really the synergy is very important, but you lose the effects of the synergy when you ingest them. And so I'm sorry to keep harping on that, but that is just something that I have just been so against. It has nothing to do with potential harmful chemicals in the oils, and everything to do with negating their effects on the body. Let's see, take into account the balance that occurs in treating the body with plants. So that we've already talked about that. Okay. Another important piece to the oils is that they are hydrophilic. While some constituents in the plant are hydrophilic and others are lipophilic. Essential oils are lipophilic. I go on into your handout here to explain the difference between water soluble and fat soluble and such. So again, because of their solubility, that determines how they are used within the body. I want to emphasize here that there are some plant constituents that actually parallel biological chemicals such as dopamine and serotonin. You have your examples listed. Clary sage and bitter orange. These, and they're noted accordingly, they parallel the biological mechanism of action when it comes to like I said, dopamine and serotonin. Helichrysum, these actually contain cannabinoids. We are more familiar with cannabinoids being such things as THC and CBD, but cannabinoids are found in a lot of other plants that are not psychoactive. Another important piece here is some of our constituents have been identified to support enzymatic processes like I was talking about with regards to the liver, but they also do support the folate cycle, the Krebs cycle, the glycolytic cycle, SAMe pathway, glutathione, SOD, and catalase production. Other ones are known for their influence on the thyroid, the adrenals, the hypothalamus, pituitary. This is the reason why you want to choose carefully. You really want to know what you're trying to affect, and never to use anything for very long. Always mix it up, and definitely use less is more, because if you think about it, if you say that my serotonin levels are too low so I can use this oil, let's just say you've been dealing with depression and you believe your serotonin levels are low, so you start to stimulate serotonin. Well, that's great, but if you go the opposite direction, now you could be potentially setting yourself up for migraines. Okay, so learning how to vary them is incredibly important. I was just trying to think of other ones. Lavender is another big one. That stimulates the production of estrogen. Not recommended for anyone who is living with estrogen dominance. Has the potential for breast cancer, prostate cancer. So and then lavender has its other issues, other concerns, I should say, that I've highlighted on your handout, and the essential oil handout. Because they are 100% active, it's best to maintain a broader perspective. If you know that you're dealing with low serotonin or low dopamine or, something, it would be okay for a while. It's kind of like I say with pharmaceuticals. If you absolutely, there's time, there's a need for everything, but it's better to keep a much broader perspective. Like, what's the ultimate goal? If calming and soothing is the immediate goal, but agitation is something that, especially like in an autistic child, they're prone to. Lavender is the last thing you want to be using with them, because estrogen happens to be a problem oftentimes, and will cause excitability. So you got to be really careful. There is definitely advantage to targeting specific issues, but at the same time maintaining a broader scope of thought. I go into explaining a little bit about blending and how to go about doing it, and how long it takes. So if you have any questions about that, I'm not going to cover it here. I'm noticing the time, so I just don't want to keep it too much longer. So at any rate, I've got it down to, if you have any questions, please by all means, ask. I'm happy to help. That's what I'm here for, and we can all talk about it. As far as adverse reactions are concerned, I've put this in here because anything is possible. According to MedicineNet in pharmacology, any unexpected or dangerous reaction to a drug, an unwanted effect caused by the administration of a drug, the onset of the adverse reaction may be sudden or develop over time. Like I said, it's always a possibility. It doesn't make any difference what you're using, whether it is man-made or natural. Adverse reactions are always possible. And the ones highlighted here are generally the ones that we feel when we're dealing with pharmaceuticals. I won't deny that I haven't had people, I don't know that I've ever had any, well, I have had sleep issues while using oils, and that's when it was combined, when I had an autistic boy asleep, and we ended up having to change his nighttime blend because he was 5 at the time, placed on an antacid, prescription antacid that they were both inhibiting this very same gene, and it was the liver enzyme, and so therefore it was beginning to cause anxiety. It countered the effect of the oil. So an adverse reaction is also a symptom. It's a symptom that it's a sign that the body's in crisis. You might say, duh, no kidding. But I don't want to, let's just go back to the example I gave a little while ago. If you were prompting serotonin and all of a sudden you started getting too much and you started getting migraines, that would be a sign that the serotonin level, you did too much with the oil. Doesn't mean the oil doesn't work for you. It means the body's asking for better regulation. So an adverse reaction is actually, again, a sign. It's a very important sign, and regardless of whether you're doing natural or man-made, it's very important. Pardon me. It's really important for you to pay attention to it, recognize it, if it's just a one-time thing or if it's ongoing. I've had people contact me that have used an oil and all of a sudden felt their heart race. That told me there was a significant hypersensitivity. I had someone just recently contact me. We started her, she's been living with some chronic issues for some time, and we started her on some things. She noticed a similar reaction to when she was younger and used to smell eucalyptus, and she'd get a runny nose and a scratchy throat, and thinking she was allergic. And what I recognized, not necessarily hypersensitivity, I recognized more of a detox that's going on. And that tells me I want to say here, when you're under an awful lot of stress, that will cause the lymph system to stagnate. This is why movement, exercise, massage is always very good with under stress, because it keeps the lymph system moving and helps the body to continually detox. If this is not something that's been occurring and you start oils, it's very possible to have a rapid detox, and it doesn't know how else to push it out because the lymph is not moving at an adequate pace. So it's really important to note your symptoms and ask your clinician. That's another thing I want to emphasize here. Yes, we're talking about you dealing with your body, and we are talking about you working with your body, and at the same time, it requires partnership, because you're emotionally attached to how this is going. When you get into an adverse reaction, you're not going to feel good, and you're going to be scared. You might be angry. You might be frustrated. And oftentimes we quit at this point, or we find somebody else. And the truth of the matter is, it's not about jumping ship. It's not about ending the process. It's about working with the body, knowing that if you're uncomfortable, I've had clients, like I said, that use an oil and all of a sudden they feel like a rapid heartbeat and maybe kind of lightheaded. Well, this particular woman was incredibly sensitive. She'd been living, she'd been in a beauty salon for years, decades. She developed chemical sensitivity. Her autonomic nervous system was on overload, and so everything was she was hypersensitive, that is just it. She's hypersensitive, and because of the neuroimmunity, I had to help back her down and really get her to use what I would consider homeopathic amounts of the oil so that she could use it, build systemic cellular strength in order to be able to use it at a higher amount, a more therapeutic amount, if you will, and actually get the benefit and not have to feel the discomfort and have the adverse reactions. So these are the things that can occur. And like I said, it's not just with the oils, and it's placed here before I get into pharmaceuticals, because it can happen with herbs, it can happen with oils, it can happen with supplements. I took a B complex, and according to what I read on the label, it had nothing else in it but B, and I had an adverse reaction to it. So it can happen with anything, and it's just a matter of paying attention and working with what your system needs and working alongside somebody else. Like I said, I did call somebody and start speaking to somebody. I have a lot of experience in this field, but I also am very emotionally attached to my body, and trust me, when you're sitting here full of hives, you're not thinking 100% clear. So getting somebody to help you is a really good idea, and something that I do suggest strongly, because we are wired for synergy. We do well together, and we can hear things, and other people can hear things and see things that we cannot when we are emotionally attached. So I like this page. This was the very first apothecary back in 1668, which was, I believe it was originally built in 1654. It was bought out by Mr. Merck in 1668. Merck, and this would be the same Merck that we have today. And you can look up Merck manuals online, and they have, they're there. Still, I think the company divided between the United States and Germany, but it's the original family. Historically, pharmaceuticals came from, as I mentioned earlier, plants. They were compounding pills thousands of years ago, and from all plant structures. And this occurred. This is our primary source of medication up until the mid 19th century. The 1780s, William Withering is the first. He was the first one to isolate digitalis from the foxglove plant, which describing the extraction process from the plant parts, as well as their effects on the patients. That was back in 1780. In the early 1800s, the isolation of superalkaloids came into being, which included morphine. 1827 is when salicylic acid was first isolated by Johann Andreas Buchner, although reported clinical trials began as early as the mid-17th century. They were synthesized by Charles. The reason why these are listed here is because there's some debate as to who really did what, but nonetheless, salicylic acid was isolated and then resynthesized, because they realized that in a synthesized form, it was less harsh on the system. And and this was done through, you'll see here shortly, through chemical companies, but this is how it came to be. Salicylic acid was kind of harsh, so they just resynthesized it to be a little bit easier on the body. Apothecary derived from the word apotheca, meaning a place where wine, spices, and herbs are stored. That was our original apothecary. Traced back to the Guild of Pepperers, formed back in 1180. They eventually developed two divisions: wholesale trade, which is your grocers, and then your spicers, which became the apothecaries. They became, in the 16th century, became the equivalent of today's pharmacies, dealing primarily with medicines, and the rest is history. You have another, I've provided you some names of, apothecaries, very big on selling drugs wholesale. And Eli Lilly was then, and they still are now. Chemical and dye companies established research labs before the mid-19th century. Chemists believed ingredients obtained from plants were infused with a vital force. I include that on here because that's very important, a vital force. And if they could, and so They didn't think that they could replicate that, and that was up until the time that they produced urea, which is a constituent found in urine. It's just produced by the body, and they actually recreated it with using an inorganic compound, ammonium cyanate. And when they realized that they could make an organic compound out of an inorganic compound, we had the birth of organic chemistry. This is important because organic chemistry does not mean it does not contain a vital force. They never came out and said they believed they were replicating a vital force, and we've come to find out they don't replicate the vital force. As you know, people have to change medications. Sometimes there's the onset of other side effects. You might call this an adverse reaction. I don't call a side effects would be considered an adverse reaction. And to me, that's indicative that the body is in need of more. And this is the reason why I do highly encourage the use of essential oils alongside, because the essential oils contain the countering. If you especially pair them properly with medications, they will actually support the body's use of they'll maintain, let me say this, they will maintain systemic benefits that and actually enhance the function of the oil, and especially when you pair it with nutrition, because pharmaceuticals are known to deplete nutrients. There again, they don't contain the vital force. They just contain a synthesized, a replicated active ingredient, and but they require the nutrients. So therefore, they take it. When I say they deplete the body of nutrients, this doesn't mean that it just sucks it dry. What it means is that these active ingredients require nutrients as cofactors, and therefore tissues are depleted. So it's really wise to at least be supplementing while taking medications. And if you include the essential oils, you are light years ahead of people who are not. The World Health Organization also believes plant research is justified. Earlier we talked about the Royal Society of Chemistry really promoting the use of plant matter for pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, and cosmetics. The World Health Organization believes it's justified as well. Current research includes combining constituents from different plants and observing the synergistic effects. This is another important piece, folks. You talk about, we talk about synergy, and we talk about active ingredients, and we know that these plants, when you're using them as a whole, you've got, if you're using an herb, you've got your phytonutrients, you've got your alkaloids, you've got ingredients that aren't found in essential oils. You don't have as much of an essential oil. It's a little bit more watered down. Definitely essential oils are far more concentrated, and so pairing them can be very beneficial. It is wise to make sure that you are not overdoing anything, but they are observing and here again, like I said, I oftentimes work with people where I will actually make dried herbal teas and pair it with essential oils. And the reason for that is because the herbs actually have a different quality to them than the oils do. And the pairing of the two creates a synergy within the body. I also do a lot of nutritional encouragement recommendations, not in the form of supplements, but just for the simple fact that pairing it intentionally with food actually provides this synergistic effect. So, and this is the ongoing research with pharmaceuticals, because why? Because they want to see if they can actually combine various active ingredients and maybe get an improved effect. I applaud them for this, because they do recognize, this also tells us that there's a recognition that these pharmaceuticals that we have aren't doing what we had hoped they would do. And like I said, even though there is a great deal of interest in plants, chemical companies maintain their position in the pharmaceutical industry as they believe they can replicate Mother Nature. So, and that's the whole purpose of doing, trying to see about combining combining here is if they can identify here synergistic effects, then they can replicate here, right? And so this is it's a catch-22. I'm just going to say that because and that's the reason why instead of saying no to medication, I say if you're going to do medication and if it's warranted, then at least work with someone to pair it with oils and helping you design a nutritional plan that really gets you to the point, to your goal, and actually helps you achieve wellness. This is the whole process of breaking the cycle of disease management is, when we remain stuck and we can't work with it, and there's not a synergy, and we consistently have adverse reactions and or side effects, and we're having to take more, and you go from high blood pressure to diabetes, or diabetes to high blood pressure, and then you go diabetes, high blood pressure, depression, or you name it. I'll give you another example. My own father has a history of alcoholism. Today, he has a blood cancer, which makes absolute sense knowing what I know about alcohol and what ethanol does to the immune system. He has blood cancer, he has Parkinson's, he has COPD, and he also has skin cancer. Of course, depression as well. So this wasn't just everything that hit him at one time. This was a progression, and he was started on his medications. My mother says that there's like a spreadsheet of medications that he has to take, and he just has to take more and more and more and more. This is disease management, and I see this every day. I encounter and acquire new clients based on that. They've just reached the point where they just can't handle this any longer, and so they need to are really looking for something more. So enhancing your conventional medicine with oils and nutrition is the best choices that you can make for yourself, and actually breaking that cycle. And the modification of genetic expression. Intracellular signaling from active ingredients. According to the FDA, an active ingredient is any component that is intended to furnish pharmacological activity or other direct effect in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, or to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals. The term includes those components that may undergo chemical change in the manufacture of the drug product and may be present in the drug product in a modified form intended to furnish the specified activity or effect. The intention is to create change within the body, yet they don't. I'm going to have to share it here separately as a different document. It's the truth. They don't know. They just don't know how it's going to ultimately affect. And and no disrespect, how could they possibly? 7.5 plus billion bodies on the planet. It is impossible to predict how it is going to affect you. If you look up any drug and the mechanism of action, they can't tell. They just know what they're targeting, but they don't know what else it's going to trigger within the system. And here again is the reason why pairing it with oils and doing it with knowledge, knowing how it's going to interact with one another is crucial, and doing so you support the genetic expression and the positive support of genetic expression, and results are improved, like I say here, when they're paired, because they don't know. That's just I wish I could. Everything that I see, anything through the World Health Organization or any research paper, any study of drugs, that's their one remark is, even though they're still undergoing drug development, they just can't, there's just no way to comprehend the full effect that these medications are going to have on the system. And so, again, knowing how they pair up, safely pair up with oils, would make all the difference in the world, because as you know, your oils they are signaling molecules, they are active ingredients, and that paired with nutrients nutrients could be from your herbs. Like I said, herbal teas contain nutrients. So it could be from that as well. But just pairing it with much plant-based source as possible. As many plant-based resources, I'll put it that way, will make all the difference in the world as far as supporting genetic expression, just not modifying it. We want to modify genetic expression if there's a problem. But if all systems are go, you want to support genetic expression. And I want to finish up by saying that I often get asked, do I have to stay on oils for the rest of my life? And my question is, what's the problem? What's the harm in that? Because we're constantly, as we noticed, we have these jumping genes. Our genes are constantly being stressed, and externally as well as internally. And so because of the external internal stressors, these transponal elements will actually alter the way our DNA expresses itself. And so to know that these oils actually alleviate a lot of that internal stress so that the body can continue to produce the proper chemistry, I say, why not use the oils? And if you pair it, and obviously you're going to be eating for the rest of your life, so pair it with the oils. And it's a lot more cost effective than having to run to the doctor, because it does support the immune system. It takes the pressure off. It supports the neurochemistry, and it really helps to modify and support our moods and our anxiety levels. So yeah, that's where I want to close this for today, and look forward to our discussions. Really want to thank you again for being on this journey with me. It's exciting times. I'm really excited to be sharing all of this with you. And you get all of these resources again as well on your handouts. Feel free to take a look at any of them. I look forward to your questions and our discussions, because this is the future. And this is our future. This is our past. And when we learn how to integrate the two, that our future is, there's no impossibility. Everything's possible when it comes to health and overcoming. It's just being willing to take action and believe. In the words of James Barrie, the man who wrote Peter Pan, you just got to believe. So until later, I hope you're having a great day, and I look forward to interacting with you. Thank you.